Before we begin, a word. Every voice you are about to hear could belong to a real person, and the next one could be yours. Play them apart and read it aloud at footnotes in folly.click. Welcome back. I am Pemberton, and this is Book 16, Part 3. The reconciliation is already coming apart. We open abroad. On a bitter note, the Jews of the cities of Asia and Libya, robbed and insulted by their Greek neighbors, send once more to Caesar and once more are protected in their ancient rights. But then we descend into the dark. Herod, having poured out fortunes on his cities, and hearing that treasure had been left in the tomb of King David, opens that sepulcher by night, and Josephus tells us that 2 of his guards were struck dead by a burst of flame, an omen the king tried in vain to buy off. And at home the poison flows again. Pheroras carries a lie to young Alexander that his father lusts after his wife Glaphyra. The king's favorite eunuchs are seized and racked. Alexander, goaded past sense, answers his father's suspicion with wild written confessions that name half the court. And on the eastern border a new war kindles, with the Trachonite robbers and the cunning Arab minister Sylleus. Let us go on, the road turns hard tonight.
The cities in Asia were mistreating the Jews, and so were the cities in Libya, which lies next to Cyrene, where people of the same nation lived. Former kings had given these Jews the same privileges as the other citizens, but at this time the Greeks insulted them, and went so far as to seize their sacred money. They also harmed them in other particular ways. Since the Jews were suffering in this way, and could find no end to the cruel treatment they received from the Greeks, they sent ambassadors to Caesar about these matters. Caesar restored to them the same privileges they had enjoyed before, and he sent letters with the same purpose to the governors of the provinces. I have added copies of those letters here as evidence of the ancient goodwill that the Roman emperors had toward us. Caesar Augustus, high priest and tribune of the people, decrees as follows. Since the nation of the Jews has been found grateful to the Roman people, not only now but also in former times, and especially since Hyrcanus the high priest was grateful under my father Caesar the emperor, it has seemed good to me and to my counselors, according to the decision and oath of the people of Rome, that the Jews should be free to follow their own customs according to the law of their ancestors, just as they followed them under Hyrcanus, high priest of the Almighty God. Their sacred money must not be touched, but must be sent to Jerusalem and placed in the care of the receivers there. They must not be required to appear before any judge on the Sabbath day, nor on the day of preparation for it after the 9th hour. If anyone is caught stealing their holy books or their sacred money, whether from the synagogue or from a public school, he shall be treated as a sacrilegious person, and his property shall be brought into the public treasury of the Romans. I also order that the testimonial they have given me, because of my regard for the piety I show toward all mankind, and because of my regard for Caius Marcus Censorinus, together with this decree, be displayed in the most distinguished place consecrated to me by the community of Asia, at Ancyra. If anyone violates any part of what has been decreed above, he shall be severely punished. This decree was inscribed on a pillar in the temple of Caesar. Caesar sends greetings to Norbanus Flaccus. Let all the Jews, however many they are, who have been accustomed by their ancient custom to send their sacred money to Jerusalem, do so freely. These were Caesar's decrees. Agrippa also wrote in the following way on behalf of the Jews. Agrippa sends greetings to the magistrates, senate, and people of the Ephesians. I direct that the care and custody of the sacred money carried to the temple at Jerusalem be left to the Jews of Asia, so that they may deal with it according to their ancient custom. Those who steal the sacred money of the Jews and flee to a sanctuary shall be taken from there and delivered to the Jews, under the same law by which sacrilegious persons are taken from sanctuary. I have also written to Silvanus the praetor that no one is to compel the Jews to appear before a judge on the Sabbath day. Marcus Agrippa sends greetings to the magistrates, senate, and people of Cyrene. The Jews of Cyrene have appealed to me for the enforcement of what Augustus ordered Flavius, then praetor of Libya, and the other procurators of that province, so that the sacred money may be sent freely to Jerusalem, as has been their custom from their ancestors. They complain that certain informers abuse them, and under the pretense of taxes that are not owed, prevent them from sending the money. I command that this money be restored without any reduction, and without causing them trouble. If any of that sacred money in the cities has been taken from its proper receivers, I further command that it be returned exactly to the Jews in that place. Caius Norbanus Flaccus, proconsul, sends greetings to the magistrates of the Sardians. Caesar has written to me and commanded me not to forbid the Jews, however many they are, either from assembling according to the custom of their ancestors, or from sending their money to Jerusalem. I have therefore written to you so that you may know that both Caesar and I want you to act accordingly. Julius Antonius the proconsul wrote in the same spirit, to the magistrates, senate, and people of the Ephesians greetings. While I was administering justice at Ephesus, on the Ides of February, the Jews who live in Asia showed me that Augustus and Agrippa had permitted them to use their own laws and customs, to offer the first fruits that each of them freely gives to the deity out of piety, and to carry them together in a group to Jerusalem without interference. They also petitioned me to confirm, by my own authority, what Augustus and Agrippa had granted. I therefore want you to know that, according to the will of Augustus and Agrippa, I permit them to follow and practice the customs of their ancestors without disturbance. I have had to record these decrees because the present history of our own actions will circulate mainly among the Greeks. By doing so I have shown them that we were formerly held in great honor, and that the rulers over us did not forbid us to keep any of the laws of our ancestors. On the contrary, they supported us while we followed our own religion and the worship we offered to God. I often mention these decrees in order to reconcile other people to us, and to remove the causes of the hatred that unreasonable men bear toward us. As for our customs, no nation always uses the same ones everywhere, and in almost every city we find customs differing from one another. But natural justice is equally suited to the advantage of all people, both Greeks and barbarians. Our laws pay the greatest attention to that justice, and if we keep them in a pure way, they make us benevolent and friendly to all people. For that reason we have cause to expect the same treatment from others, and to tell them that they should not think differences in established practices are enough reason for estrangement. Instead, they should join us in pursuing virtue and honesty, for these belong to all people in common and are by themselves sufficient to preserve human life. I now return to the course of my history. Herod had spent enormous amounts of money on cities both inside and outside his own kingdom. He had also heard long before that Hyrcanus, who had ruled before him, had opened David's sepulcher and taken 3,000 talents of silver from it, while a much larger amount had been left behind, enough to meet all Herod's needs. For a long time he had intended to try the same thing. At this time he opened the sepulcher at night and went into it, trying to keep the matter completely unknown in the city, and taking with him only his most trusted friends. He did not find any money, as Hyrcanus had, but he did find gold furnishings and other precious goods that had been stored there, and he took them all away. Still, he wanted to search more carefully and go farther inside, even to the bodies of David and Solomon themselves. But as the report went, a flame burst out against those who entered, and 2 of his guards were killed. Herod was terrified and left the place. Because of the fright he had suffered, he built a monument of atonement at the mouth of the sepulchre. It was made of white stone and cost a great deal. Even Nicolaus, Herod's historian, mentions this monument that Herod built, though he says nothing about Herod's going down into the sepulchre, because he knew the action had a bad reputation. He handles many other matters in the same way in his book. He wrote while Herod was alive and reigning, and wrote as someone trying to please him and serving him. He touched only on what added to Herod's glory, openly excused many of his notorious crimes, and carefully concealed them. Wanting to put an attractive face on the deaths of Mariamne and her sons, which were barbarous acts by the king, he tells falsehoods about Mariamne's unchastity and about treacherous designs that her sons supposedly formed against Herod. He follows this pattern throughout his whole work, giving grand praise to Herod's just actions, while eagerly defending his unjust ones. As I have said, there is much that can be offered in excuse for Nicolaus, because he did not really write this as a history for other people, but as something meant to serve the king himself. As for us, we come from a family closely connected with the Asamonean kings, and because of that we hold the honorable office of the priesthood. We consider it improper to say anything false about them, and so we have described their actions in an honest and upright way. Although we respect many of Herod's descendants who still reign, we give greater honor to truth than to them, even though doing so sometimes brings their displeasure upon us. Herod's troubles within his family seemed to grow worse because of this attempt on David's sepulchre. Perhaps divine vengeance increased the calamities that had already come upon him, making them incurable. Or perhaps fortune attacked him in such a way that the timing made people strongly believe the misfortunes had come because of his impiety. The disorder in his palace was like a civil war. The hatred among his relatives was so intense that each seemed to compete with the others in slander. Antipater continually used schemes against his brothers, and did so with great cunning. When he was away from them, he loaded them with accusations, but he often pretended to defend them, so that this appearance of goodwill would make him more believable and help him carry out his designs against them. In many different ways he deceived his father, who believed that everything Antipater did was meant for his safety. Herod also recommended Ptolemy, one of the chief managers of the affairs of his kingdom, to Antipater, and he consulted with Antipater's mother about public business as well. These people became everything to him. They did whatever they wished, and they made the king angry with any other persons whenever they thought it would help their own interests. Meanwhile, the sons of Mariamne were constantly brought into worse condition. They were pushed aside and placed in a more dishonorable rank, though by birth they were the noblest, and they could not bear the disgrace. Among the women, Glaphyra, Alexander's wife and the daughter of Archelaus, hated Salome. She hated her both because of her love for her husband, and because Glaphyra seemed to behave with some insolence towards Salome's daughter, who was the wife of Aristobulus. Glaphyra found it very hard to endure that this daughter should be treated as her equal. Besides the second quarrel that had broken out among them, the king's brother Pheroras also did not keep himself free from trouble. He had a special cause for suspicion and hatred. He was so overcome by the charms of his wife that he fell into a kind of madness, despised the king's daughter to whom he had been betrothed, and fixed all his affection on the other woman, who had once been only a servant. Herod was grieved by the dishonor done to him, since he had given Pheroras many favors and raised him to such power that he was almost a partner in the kingdom. Herod saw that Pheroras had not made a proper return for all this, and he considered himself unhappy because of it. So, after Pheroras made this unworthy refusal, Herod gave the young woman to Phasaelus's son. After some time, when Herod thought the heat of his brother's passion had passed, he blamed Pheroras for his former conduct and urged him to marry his second daughter, whose name was Cypros. Ptolemy also advised Pheroras to stop insulting his brother and to leave the woman he had loved. He told him it was disgraceful to be so deeply in love with a servant that he would deprive himself of the king's goodwill, become a cause of grief to him, and make himself hated by him. Pheroras knew this advice would be to his advantage, especially since he had been accused before and forgiven. So he put his wife away, though he already had a son by her, and promised the king that he would marry his second daughter. He agreed that the marriage would take place on the 30th day afterward, and swore that he would have no further dealings with the woman he had put away. But when the 30 days had passed, he was so enslaved by his passions that he fulfilled none of his promises, and instead continued living with his former wife. This made Herod grieve openly and become angry, and the king was constantly saying one thing or another against Pheroras. Many people used the king's anger as an opportunity to raise slanders against him. The king no longer had even one quiet day or hour. One fresh quarrel after another arose among his relatives, and among those dearest to him. Salome had a harsh temper and was hostile to Miriam and his sons. She would not even allow her own daughter, the wife of Aristobulus, one of those young men, to feel goodwill toward her husband. Instead, she persuaded her to report anything he said to her in private. When ordinary misunderstandings occurred, Salome turned them into many suspicions. In this way she learned all their affairs, and made the young woman hostile toward the young man. To please her mother, the daughter often said that the young men mentioned Mariamne when they were alone, hated their father, and continually threatened that, if they ever gained the kingdom, they would make Herod's sons by his other wives into country schoolmasters, because their present education and diligence in study suited them for that work. As for the women, whenever the young men saw them adorned in their mother's clothes, they threatened that instead of their present bright apparel they would be dressed in sackcloth and shut up so closely that they would not see the light of the sun. Salome quickly carried these stories to the king. He was troubled when he heard them and tried to settle matters, but the suspicions tormented him. Growing more and more uneasy, he believed everyone against everyone else. Yet when he rebuked his sons and heard the defense they made for themselves, he was calmer for a while, though soon afterward much worse misfortunes came upon him. Pheroras went to Alexander, the husband of Glaphyra, who was the daughter of Archelaus, as has already been said. He told him that he had heard from Salome that Herod had fallen in love with Glaphyra, and that his passion for her could not be cured. When Alexander heard this, his youth and jealousy made him burn with anger. Herod had often behaved kindly and attentively toward Glaphyra, and Alexander now interpreted all of that in the worst possible way, because Pheroras had planted the suspicion in him. He could not hide his distress, and he told Herod what Pheroras had said. This threw Herod into greater disorder than ever. He could not endure such a false and shameful slander, and it deeply troubled him. Again and again he lamented the wickedness of his own household, how well he had treated them, and how badly they had repaid him. He sent for Pheroras and rebuked him. "You vilest of all men! Have you reached such an immeasurable and outrageous degree of ingratitude that you not only imagine such things about me, but even speak of them? Now I understand what you intend. Your purpose is not merely to disgrace me by saying such things to my son. You are trying to persuade him to plot against me and destroy me by poison. What man, unless he had some good spirit beside him, as my son has, would endure such a suspicion about his father and not take revenge on him? Do you think you have merely dropped a word for him to consider? You have put a sword into his hand to kill his father. What do you mean by pretending kindness to him and his brother, when you really hate them both, only so that you can raise a reproach against me and speak of things that no one but an impious wretch like you could either conceive in his mind or declare with his mouth? Begone! You are a plague to your benefactor and your brother, and may your evil conscience go with you. As for me, I will still overcome my relatives with kindness. Far from avenging myself on them as they deserve, I give them greater benefits than they are worthy of." So the king spoke. Pheroras, caught in the very act of his villainy, said that Salome had devised the plot and that the words had come from her. But as soon as Salome heard this, for she was nearby, she cried out as if she expected to be believed. She insisted that no such thing had ever come out of her mouth. She said that they were all earnestly trying to make the king hate her and get rid of her because of the goodwill she bore Herod, and because she was always foreseeing the dangers that were coming upon him. She added that there were now more plots against him than usual, and that since she alone had urged her brother to put away his present wife and marry the king's daughter, it was no wonder he hated her. As Salome said these things, she repeatedly tore her hair and beat her breast. Her expression made her denial seem believable, but the perverseness of her character at the same time revealed her deceit in the whole affair. Pheroras was trapped between them and had nothing plausible to say in his own defense. He admitted that he had said what he was accused of saying, but when he claimed that he had heard it from Salome, he was not believed. The confusion among them grew worse, as did their angry words against one another. At last the king, hating both his brother and his sister, sent them both away. He praised the moderation of his son, who had reported the matter to him himself, and in the evening he withdrew to refresh himself. After this quarrel, Salom's reputation suffered greatly, because people thought she had been the first to raise the slander. The king's wives were angry with her, knowing that she was a very ill-natured woman who could be a friend at one time and an enemy at another. They were constantly saying one thing or another against her, and something that now happened made them even bolder in speaking against her. There was a man named Obodas, king of Arabia, who was by nature inactive and lazy. Most of his affairs were managed by Sylleus. Sylleus was a clever man, though still young, and he was also handsome. On one occasion Sylleus came to Herod and dined with him. There he saw Salome and set his heart on her. When he learned that she was a widow, he began to converse with her. Because Salome was at that time less in favor with her brother, she looked on Sylleus with desire, and became very eager to marry him. In the days that followed, many very clear signs appeared that the two were in agreement with each other. The women carried this news to the king and laughed at how indecent it was. Herod then inquired further about it from Pheroras and asked him to watch them at supper, to see how they behaved toward each other. Pheroras told him that, from the signs they made with their heads and eyes, it was plain that they were both in love. After this, Sylleus the Arabian, now under suspicion, went away. But 2 or 3 months later he returned, as if for that very purpose, and spoke to Herod about the matter. He asked that Salome be given to him as his wife, saying that this family connection would not be harmful to Herod's affairs, since it would unite him with Arabia, whose government was already effectively in Sylleus's power, and would plainly be his in the future. Herod therefore spoke with his sister and asked whether she was willing to make this match. She immediately agreed. Sylleus was told that he must come over to the Jewish religion, and that only then could he marry her. On no other terms was the marriage possible. He could not accept this condition, and he went away, saying that if he did so he would be stoned by the Arabs. Then Pheroras reproached Salome for her lack of chastity, and the women did so even more, saying that Sylleus had corrupted her. As for the young woman whom the king had betrothed to his brother Pheroras, whom Pheroras had not taken, as I have already related, because he was in love with his former wife, Salome asked Herod to give her instead to her son by Costobarus. Herod was quite willing to arrange this match, but Pheroras dissuaded him. He argued that Salome's son would not treat the young woman kindly, since his father had been killed by Herod, and that it was more just for Pheroras' own son, who was to succeed him in the tetrarchy, to have her. So Pheroras asked Herod's pardon, and persuaded him to do this. Accordingly, when the young woman's betrothal was changed, she was given to the son of Pheroras, and the king gave her a dowry of 100 talents. Herod's family troubles did not improve, they kept growing worse. Then an incident occurred that began from a shameful cause, and went on until it brought him serious difficulties. The king had several eunuchs, and because they were handsome he was especially fond of them. One was trusted with serving his drink, another with serving his supper, and a third with putting him to bed. This third man also handled some of the chief business of the government. Someone told the king that these eunuchs had been corrupted with large sums of money by Alexander, the king's son. When the eunuchs were questioned about whether Alexander had had sexual relations with them, they admitted that he had, but said they knew of no further harm he had planned against his father. But when they were tortured more harshly, and were brought to the edge of endurance, and the torturers, to please Antipater, stretched the rack as far as they could, they said that Alexander had deep hostility and natural hatred toward his father. They said he had told them that Herod could not hope to live much longer, and that, to hide his great age, he dyed his hair black and tried to conceal whatever would reveal how old he was. Alexander, they said, promised that if one of them would attach himself to him when he gained the kingdom, which, in spite of his father, could pass to no one else, he would quickly have the first place under him. Alexander said he was already prepared to take the kingdom, not only because it was his birthright, but because of the preparations he had made to obtain it. Many rulers and many friends were on his side, and they were not insignificant men, but people ready both to act and to suffer whatever might come because of it. When Herod heard this confession, he was filled with anger and fear. Some parts of it seemed insulting to him, and others made him suspect that dangers were closing around him. Both feelings provoked him, and he became terribly afraid that some heavier plot had been laid against him than he could now escape. Because of this he did not make an open inquiry, but sent spies around to watch those he suspected. By now he was overrun with suspicion and hatred toward everyone near him. In his concern for his own safety, he gave free rein to these suspicions and began to suspect innocent people as well. He set himself no limits. Those who stayed close to him seemed to have the greatest power to harm him, and so they frightened him greatly. As for those who did not usually come to him, simply naming them was enough to make them suspected, and he thought himself safer when they were destroyed. At last his household reached such a state that no one felt secure of escape. They began accusing one another, imagining that the first person to accuse someone else would be most likely to save himself. Yet when anyone ruined others in this way, he was hated. Those who accused others unjustly were thought to suffer justly when punishment came back on them, and by accusing others, they only delayed their own accusation. They also used this method to carry out private hostilities. When they were caught, they were punished in the same manner. Thus these men tried to use the moment as a weapon and a trap against their enemies, but when they used it, they were themselves caught in the very trap they had set for others. The king soon regretted what he had done, because he had no clear proof that the people he had killed were guilty. Yet his severity went even further. He did not use his repentance as a reason to stop doing such things, but as a reason to inflict the same punishment on their accusers. This was the disturbed state of affairs in the palace. Herod had already told many of his friends plainly that they should not appear before him or come into the palace. The reason for this order was that, when they were present, he had less freedom to act, or felt more restrained because of them. At this time he expelled Andromachus and Gamaliel, men who had long been his friends, had been very useful to him in the affairs of his kingdom, had helped his family through embassies and advice, had served as tutors to his sons, and had in a sense enjoyed the highest degree of freedom with him. He expelled Andromachus because his son Demetrius was a companion of Alexander. He expelled Gamaliel because he knew that Gamaliel was well disposed toward Alexander, a feeling that came from having been with him in his youth, when Alexander was at school and away in Rome. Herod drove these men from his palace, and he was willing enough to do worse to them, but because he did not want to seem to use such license against men of such great reputation, he contented himself with stripping them of their rank and of their power to obstruct his wicked actions. Antipater was the cause of all this. He knew the mad and uncontrolled manner in which his father was now acting, and since he had long been one of his counselors, he urged him forward. Antipater thought he would bring Herod to carry out something decisive once everyone who might oppose him had been removed. So when Andromachus and his friends had been driven away, and no longer had any conversation or freedom with the king, Herod first examined under torture everyone he thought faithful to Alexander, asking whether they knew of any attempt by him against his father. These men died without saying anything of the sort. That only made the king more eager to discover something, since he could not find the crimes he suspected. Antipater was clever at raising slanders against people who were truly innocent, claiming that their denials were only proof of their steadfastness and loyalty to Alexander. In this way he provoked Herod to use torture on large numbers of people in order to uncover plots that were supposedly still hidden. Among the many who were tortured, one person said he knew that the young man had often complained about the very things for which he was praised. When people commended Alexander for being tall, for being a skillful marksman, and for surpassing all men in other admirable exercises, he said that these natural gifts, though good in themselves, did not benefit him, because his father was troubled by them and envied him for them. When Alexander walked with his father, he tried to stoop and make himself look shorter so that he would not seem too tall. When he shot at anything while hunting in his father's presence, he deliberately missed the mark because he knew how ambitious his father was to be superior in such exercises. When the man had been tortured over this statement, and then had some relief given to his body, he added that Alexander had his brother Aristobulus as his helper, and that the two had planned to lie in wait for their father while they were hunting and kill him. After doing this, they meant to flee to Rome and ask to have the kingdom given to them. Letters from the young man to his brother were also found, in which he complained that his father had acted unjustly by giving Antipater a territory whose yearly revenues amounted to 200 talents. On the basis of these confessions, Herod immediately thought he had something that, in his own opinion, supported his suspicion about his sons. So he arrested Alexander and put him in chains. Even so, Herod remained uneasy and was not fully satisfied that what he had heard was true. When he reconsidered the matter, he saw that the evidence amounted only to youthful complaints and quarrels, and that it was unbelievable that his son, after killing him, would openly go to Rome to beg for the kingdom. He wanted some surer sign of his son's wickedness, and was very anxious about it, so that he would not appear to have condemned him to prison too rashly. He therefore tortured the leading friends of Alexander and put quite a few of them to death, but he did not obtain from them any of the things he suspected. While Herod was intensely occupied with this matter, and the palace was full of terror and turmoil, one of the younger men, when he was in extreme agony, confessed that Alexander had sent to his friends at Rome and asked that he quickly be invited there by Caesar, because he could reveal a plot against him. He said that Mithridates, the king of Parthia, had entered into friendship with his father against the Romans, and that Alexander had a poisonous potion already prepared at Ascalori. Herod believed these accusations. In his miserable condition, they gave him a kind of comfort, because they seemed to excuse his rash behavior and let him flatter himself that matters really were as bad as he had feared. Still, although he worked hard to find the poison that was supposed to have been prepared, he could not find any. Alexander, for his part, was eager to make his own terrible misfortunes even worse. He pretended that he would not deny the charges. By doing so, he answered his father's rashness with an even greater offense of his own. Perhaps he wanted to shame Herod for believing slanders so easily. Above all, if he could make his story believed, he meant to torment his father and the whole kingdom. So he wrote 4 letters and sent them to Herod, saying that there was no need to torture any more people, because he had indeed plotted against him. He said that Pheroras and the most trusted of Herod's friends had been his partners, that Salome had come to him at night and had lain with him whether he wanted her to or not, and that everyone had agreed to kill Herod as soon as possible, so they could be freed from the constant fear in which they lived because of him. Among those accused were Ptolemy and Sapinius, who had been among the king's most faithful friends. What more can be said than this? The people who had once been closest friends became like wild beasts toward one another, as though a kind of madness had fallen on them. There was no room left for defense or for answering the charges in order to discover the truth. Instead, people were condemned to destruction at random. Some mourned those who were in prison, others mourned those who had been put to death, and still others mourned because they expected the same miseries to fall on themselves. A gloomy emptiness made the kingdom look deformed, the complete opposite of the happy condition it had once enjoyed. Herod's own life was also completely disturbed. Since he could trust no one, he was severely punished by expecting still more misery. In his imagination he often thought that his son had attacked him, or that his son was standing beside him with a sword in his hand. Night and day his mind was fixed on this thought, turning it over and over, just as if he were out of his senses. This was the miserable condition Herod was now in. When Archelaus, king of Cappadocia, heard what condition Herod was in, he was greatly distressed for his daughter and for the young man who was her husband. He also grieved with Herod as with a friend, because Herod was caught in such great turmoil. Archelaus therefore came to Jerusalem on purpose to settle their differences. When he found Herod in such a mood, he thought it would be entirely the wrong time to rebuke him or claim that he had acted rashly. That would naturally make Herod argue the point, and by defending himself more and more he would only become more irritated. So Archelaus used another method to repair the earlier misfortunes. He appeared angry with the young man and said that Herod had been so mild that he had not acted rashly at all. He also said that he would dissolve his daughter's marriage with Alexander, and that he could not in justice spare his own daughter as she knew anything about the plot and had failed to tell Herod. When Archelaus showed this attitude, which was different from what Herod had expected or imagined, and when he generally took Herod's side and acted angry on his behalf, the king's harshness softened. Because Archelaus seemed to confirm that Herod had acted justly so far, Herod gradually began to recover the feelings of a father. Herod was pitiable from both sides. When some people disproved the slanders brought against the young man, he flew into a passion. But when Archelaus joined in accusing him, Herod melted into tears and fatherly sorrow. He therefore asked Archelaus not to dissolve his son's marriage, and he was no longer as angry as before over Alexander's offenses. Once Archelaus had brought Herod to a more moderate temper, he shifted the slanders onto Herod's friends. He said they must have been the cause of corrupting so young a man, one who did not know malice. He thought there was more reason to suspect the brother than the son. At this Herod became very angry with Pheroras, who now had no one able to reconcile him with his brother. Seeing that Archelaus had the greatest influence over Herod, Pheroras went to him dressed as a mourner and showing every sign of a ruined man. Archelaus did not ignore his plea, but neither did he immediately undertake to change the king's attitude toward him. Instead, he said it would be better for Pheroras to go to the king himself and confess that he had been the cause of everything. That would keep the king's anger from becoming excessive toward him, and then Archelaus would be present to help him. After Archelaus persuaded Pheroras to do this, he succeeded with both men. Beyond all expectation, the slanders raised against the young man were wiped away. As soon as Archelaus had made the reconciliation, he went back to Cappadocia. At that moment he had proved himself the most welcome person in the world to Herod. For that reason Herod gave him the richest gifts as signs of his respect. Since Archelaus was also generous on other occasions, Herod considered him one of his dearest friends. Herod also made an agreement with him that he would go to Rome, because he had written to Caesar about these affairs. So they traveled together as far as Antioch. There Herod reconciled Archelaus with Titus, the president of Syria, with whom Archelaus had been in serious conflict. After that Herod returned to Judea. After Herod had gone to Rome and returned home, a war broke out between him and the Arabians. This was how it began. The people of Trachonite, after Caesar had taken their country from Zenodorus and added it to Herod's kingdom, no longer had the power to live by robbery. They were forced instead to plow the land and live quietly, which they hated, and even when they worked the soil, it produced little for them. At first the king would not allow them to rob, so they gave up that unjust way of living at their neighbors' expense, and Herod gained a great reputation for his careful government. But when Herod sailed to Rome, at the time when he went to accuse his son Alexander, and to place Antipater under Caesar's protection, the Trachonites spread a report that he was dead. They revolted from his rule and returned to their old habit of robbing their neighbors. During the king's absence his commanders subdued them. But about 40 of the chief robbers, frightened by what had happened to those who had been captured, left the country and withdrew into Arabia. Sylleus received them there, after he had failed to marry Salome, and gave them a fortified place to live in. From there they overran not only Judea, but all Cilicia as well, carrying off plunder while Sylleus gave them safe places of refuge and rest for their wicked work. When Herod came back from Rome, he saw that his dominions had suffered greatly from them. Since he could not reach the robbers themselves, because they had a secure retreat in Arabia under the protection of the Arabian government, he was deeply troubled by the injuries they had done him. He went through all Trachonitis and killed their relatives. This made the robbers still angrier, because among them it was a law to avenge the murder of relatives by every possible means. So they continued, without punishment, to tear and ruin everything under Herod's rule. Herod then spoke with Saturninus and Volumnius about these robberies and demanded that the robbers be punished. They only became more settled in their robberies, grew more numerous, and caused very great disturbances. They wasted the lands and villages that belonged to Herod's kingdom and killed the men they caught, until these unlawful acts became almost a real war, for the robbers now numbered about 1,000. Herod was bitterly displeased by this. He demanded that the robbers be handed over, and also demanded the money he had lent to Abodas through Sylleus, which was 60 talents. Since the time for payment had already passed, he asked to have it paid. Sylleus, who had pushed Abodas aside and managed everything himself, denied that the robbers were in Arabia and delayed payment of the money. A hearing about this was held before Saturninus and Volumnius, who were then presidents of Syria. At last, through their mediation, it was agreed that within 30 days Herod should receive his money, and that each side should give back the other's subjects. In Herod's kingdom not one of the other side's subjects was found, whether for wrongdoing or for any other reason. But it was proved that the Arabians were sheltering the robbers. When the appointed day for payment passed and Sylleus had fulfilled no part of the agreement, and had gone to Rome, Herod again demanded payment of the money and the surrender of the robbers who were in Arabia. With the permission of Saturninus and Volumnius, he carried out the judgment himself against those who refused to obey. He took his army and led it into Arabia. In 3 days he marched 7 stages, and when he reached the garrison where the robbers were, he attacked them, captured them all, and demolished the place, which was called Ripta, while harming no one else. The Arabians came to help them under their captain Nasib, and a battle followed. A few of Herod's soldiers were killed, along with Nasib, the captain of the Arabians, and about 20 of his men. The rest fled. After Herod had punished these robbers, he stationed 3,000 Idumeans in Trachonite, and by doing so restrained the robbers there. He also sent an account to the commanders around Phoenicia, showing that he had done only what he ought to have done in punishing the disobedient Arabians. After careful inquiry, they found that his account was true. Nevertheless, messengers hurried to Sylleus in Rome and told him what had happened, making everything sound worse, as people commonly do. Sylleus had already made himself known to Caesar, and was then around the palace. As soon as he heard the news, he put on black clothing, went into Caesar, and said that Arabia had been afflicted by war, and that his whole kingdom was in great disorder because Herod had laid it waste with his army. With tears in his eyes, he said that 2,500 of the leading men among the Arabians had been destroyed, that their captain Aspis, his close friend and kinsman, had been killed, that the riches at Ripta had been carried away, and that Abodas had been treated with contempt, since his weak bodily condition made him unfit for war, and for that reason neither he nor the Arabian army had been present. Sylleus added spitefully that he himself would not have left the country unless he had believed Caesar would ensure peace among them all, and that if he had been there, he would have made sure the war did not turn out to Herod's advantage. When Caesar heard this, he was provoked. He asked only one question, both of Herod's friends who were present and of his own friends who had come from Syria, whether Herod had led an army there. When they had to admit that he had, Caesar did not wait to hear why Herod had done it or how it had happened. He became very angry and wrote sharply to Herod. The substance of his letter was that although in former times he had treated Herod as his friend, from now on he would treat him as his subject. Sylleus also wrote an account of this to the Arabians. They were so encouraged by it that they neither surrendered the robbers who had fled to them nor paid the money they owed. They also kept the pastures they had rented and held them without paying rent, all because the king of the Jews was now in a weakened position due to Caesar's anger. The people of Trachonite also used this opportunity to rise against the Idumean garrison and join the Arabians in the same robberies. Because the Arabians had plundered their country, they became even harsher in their unlawful actions, both for profit and for revenge. Herod was forced to endure all this, because the confidence he had drawn from Caesar's favor was now completely gone. Caesar would not even receive an embassy from him to make an apology on his behalf, and when the ambassadors came again, he sent them away without success. So Herod fell into sadness and fear. The position of Sylleus grieved him greatly, since Sylleus was now believed by Caesar, was present in Rome, and even sometimes aimed higher. Then Abodas died, and Aeneas, whose name was later changed to Aretas, took the government. Sylleus tried by slanders to have him removed from the principality, so that he could take it himself. For this purpose he gave much money to the courtiers and promised much money to Caesar. Caesar was indeed angry that Aretas had not sent to him before taking the kingdom. Still, Aeneas sent Caesar a letter, gifts, and a golden crown weighing many talents. The letter accused Sylleus of being a wicked servant, of killing Abodas by poison, of ruling him however he pleased while he was alive, of corrupting the wives of the Arabians, and of borrowing money in order to gain the dominion for himself. Yet Caesar paid no attention to these accusations, and sent the ambassadors back without accepting any of the gifts. In the meantime, the affairs of Judea and Arabia grew worse and worse, partly because they were in a state of disorder, and partly because, bad as conditions were, no one had power to govern them. Of the 2 kings, one was not yet confirmed in his kingdom, and therefore lacked authority to restrain evildoers. And as for Herod, Caesar was directly angry at him for having avenged himself, so he was forced to bear all the injuries done to him. At last, seeing no end to the troubles around him, Herod resolved to send ambassadors to Rome again, to find out whether his friends had succeeded in softening Caesar, and to address Caesar himself. The ambassador he sent was Nicolaus of Damascus.
And there we will pause, with Herod hemmed in on every side a war smouldering in Arabia, his court a nest of torturers and informers, and his own sons half mad with the certainty that their father means to kill them. The omen at David's tomb hangs over all of it, a king reaching into the grave of the anointed one of old, and drawing back a scorched hand. Next time, in part 4, the end of the book, and the end of the young men. A smooth-tongued Spartan named Eunuchs arrives to sell his flattery to every side at once. Sylleus is brought low before Caesar at Rome, and Caesar, weary of it all, sends Herod home with leave to summon a great court at Berytus and settle the fate of his sons. One old soldier will dare to stand in the way. Mind the footnotes, and beware the folly. One last thing before you go. There is a part on our stage still wanting a voice, and it may as well be yours. Come and read for us at footnotesandfolly.click, and be in the next telling rather than only watching it. And before the lamp goes out, a small request. If something tonight taught you, or surprised you, or simply delighted you, do leave a comment and tell me what it was. And if there is a work, an author, or a tale you should like me to take up next, set it down there as well. I read every one, and many an episode has begun its life as a viewer's suggestion. Until next time.